I laughed at something I shouldn't have yesterday. You see, I was at the conference-wide UCC youth retreat with members from our confirmation class, and we were up on PSR's campus, and during one of the breaks from the activities where all the kids are kind of playing around on the grass of the quad, I was standing next to my good confirmation buddies, Alex Casandino and Patrick Houston. Great guys. And we're standing there watching some kids from another church throw around a frisbee. When the frisbee gets away from one of them, instead of traveling straight and fast, it takes a long, wide curve through the air. And there's a boy on the other side of the grass, and he's following the errant throw. He's watching the curve, and he's focusing on the frisbee running with his arms out, and then, bam, runs right into a bush. And the branches from the bush must have pushed him back a good 3 feet. Just boom. Whew. He stumbled into a bush, straight into the branches, while the frisbee just sailed on past. Now, I'd like to tell you that Alex and Patrick and I's first reaction was to run and offer help out of our Christian concern for this young man. But that'd be lying. We laughed. He was all right, after all, his ego more bruised than anything else, and it was funny to see him running with such single-minded focus on the frisbee and stumble into the bush. Stumbling is a problem for Paul in our text today. The line is, "For Jews demand signs and Greeks desire wisdom, but we proclaim Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles, but to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God." Now, for us to understand what Paul is talking about, for us to understand Paul at all, I think we need to remember that when Paul divides the world into Jews and Gentiles, he places himself among the Jews. Paul is a Jew. Paul is a learned Jew. In fact, before he began to proclaim Christ crucified, Paul was actively persecuting those who did so on behalf of the Jewish authorities in Jerusalem. Now, why was it that Paul and these particular Jews were persecuting their brothers and sisters who chose to follow Christ? Well, for a lot of reasons, probably, but primary among them was the proclamation that Jesus of Nazareth, the crucified one, was the Christ, the Messiah, the anointed one of God. You see, in messianic strains of the Israelite religion, there had long been a belief that God's anointed, the Messiah, would come to redeem Israel from their present troubles. A colonized people living under Roman rule, many Jews expected the Messiah to come and free them from Roman oppression, restoring the Davidic monarchy and the independence of God's people. And yet these followers of Jesus were claiming that he was the Messiah. They were claiming that he was the Christ. The same Jesus that was betrayed by his followers, arrested, beaten, insulted, publicly humiliated, and hung on a cross to die for all to see. This same Jesus they were calling Christ. What kind of a Messiah is this? He didn't overthrow the Romans. The Romans hung him on a cross where he suffered and died, a God-forsaken man. To call such a person Messiah seemed insulting. It seemed insulting to those who waited for the Messiah, and it seemed insulting to the God whom they worshiped. To proclaim Christ crucified was indeed a stumbling block for Jews like Paul. But then, one day, Paul's horse stumbled. In a flash of light, the resurrected Christ appeared to him, causing his horse to stumble and Paul to fall to the ground. This experience changed the course of Paul's life. His vision of the resurrected Jesus left him completely convinced that Jesus was indeed the Messiah, the very Son of God. But there still remained the fact that this Jesus had been crucified. How could Jesus be the Messiah and be crucified? What good is a crucified Christ? In many ways, I believe we're still dealing with this dilemma today. The cross is a stumbling block for us as well. We love our Jesus, and we love the God that sent him to heal, to feed, to preach, and to teach. But we can't quite understand why this Jesus has to die such a horrible death, why our loving God would let our beloved Jesus suffer. Now, one solution to this problem is simply to ignore it. To choose instead to focus on the kinder, gentler aspects of the gospel. And yet, there is no getting away from the crucifixion. Each time we focus single-mindedly on the loving mercy of God, we run smack into the crucifixion, just like the Frisbee player who can't see the bush in front of him, because the cross is right in front of us. The gospel writers disagree on all sorts of issues, but all of them have the crucifixion. The cross stands at the center of the Christian tradition. I will confess that I was ignorant of our own cross, the one in the center of the sanctuary here, until this last Christmas Eve. See, I guess it's because I usually sit up here on the chancel and face out, so I don't really get to see what you guys see, this cross here. But I was here on Christmas Eve, and the lights had been dimmed for the evening service, and I was scurrying around with Meredith, taking care of last-minute details, when I looked up and saw the cross. You see, the lights were dimmed, and this cross here is backlit. There is a light that shines from beyond the cross. It was stunning. I stopped and looked up at it. This cross hanging high in the center of our sanctuary, surrounded by the light that shone from beyond it. I would suggest that the reason we can never ignore the cross for too long is not just because it is in all of the Gospels, or because it's right here in our sanctuary, but rather because of what it stands for. The cross of Jesus Christ is one of the most powerful symbols of suffering, death, and God-forsakenness that the world has ever known. And although we confess a God who loves us and is always with us, we must admit that there is a great deal in our world that seems God-forsaken. We are approaching the one-year anniversary of the tsunami that devastated Japan. Do you remember the footage from that disaster? Seeing the walls of water destroy everything in their path, buildings, roads, cars, human bodies, thousands of them being carried away by the waves. What possible comfort or hope could be given to the survivors as they surveyed their God-forsaken home on the day following that tsunami? Think back a few years further, and you may remember with me a God-forsaken BART platform. A platform where an innocent and unarmed man lay on the ground with his hands behind his back and was shot in the back of the head. What hope can be offered to the family and friends of Oscar Grant? But we need not venture so far afield as Japan or so far back as New Year's Day 2009 to find the suffering and God-forsakenness of our world, for we know it intimately. We have received the news of family members dying, often well before their time. We have heard the diagnoses of cancer fall to our loved ones. Many of us deal with the darkness of addiction, mental illness, depression, and anxiety. We suffer and we see our loved ones suffer far too often, and we want to cry out, why? We echo Jesus' cry from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? This suffering and death, this seeming God-forsakenness is real. These things have happened, and they do happen. They are part of our lives. I have no words to make them easier. I cannot speak them away. They stand before us just as the cross stands at the center of the Christian faith. But I would be so bold as to claim that there is reason still to hope. For as Christians, we know that the cross is backlit. There is a light that shines from beyond the cross. It is in this light that our hope lies. For we have seen the suffering and the God-forsakenness of our world, and any light that cannot shine past the cross, any light that comes from ignoring the cross, can offer only a hollow mockery of hope, for it cannot stand up to the darkness of our reality. The light that shines from beyond the cross is the only light bright enough to bring hope to our suffering world. As we journey toward the resurrection this Lent, let us not ignore the cross, for to do so might cause us to miss the light that shines beyond it. Let us walk with our eyes on the cross so that when we arrive at the resurrection, we may bask in the light that shines from beyond the cross. Amen.